find them to work for you?
like riots in France and that kind of stuff. Watch live. Sorry if I can hear us.
Jesus is really giving Paul, if you will, this, see, Paul's conversion is recorded 4 times. He speaks about it 3 times in Acts, and it's one of the letters. So you get 4 times is really mentioned about his conversion, but Jesus does really give him direction here, what he's supposed to do. But arise, stand up to thy feet, for I have appeared unto thee for this purpose, to make thee a minister and witness both of these things which thou hast seen, and of those things in which I will appear unto thee. Meaning Jesus taught Paul and in the gospel about things that he did not know and had not seen. And this is part of his apostolic authority. I was taught by Jesus this gospel. And he says, then I went back to Peter to make sure I wasn't crazy, and the kings confirmed the thing. But my gospel was, Jesus, I'm going to teach you the things that you don't know, because you weren't here when I died and was raised from the dead. You don't know about my public ministry, not firsthand. And his purpose here, and delivering thee from the people and from the Gentiles, unto whom I send thee. So we call him the apostle of, or to the Gentiles. Though he, whenever possible, he would try to win the Jew. This is how Paul operated. If you've been reading Acts, you see it. To open the eyes and to turn them from darkness to light, and the power of Satan unto God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins, and inheritance among them which are sanctified by faith that is in me. So this is his, how would you say, fighting orders? This is his script here. This is the orders. And Paul is relating this, but this is what Jesus did. This is what Jesus said to him. Paul speaks of it. Now, interesting here. We mentioned Paul. Oh, you're timely. We mentioned Paul writing 13 or 14 of the 27 letters of the New Testament. How about the Apostle Peter? Or how many did he write? You can show me your fingers. How many did he write? Ooh, just 2 letters. And I'm going to mention who else wrote here. It's interesting. 1st and 2nd Peter, and that's it. And then, how about the Apostle John? This is maybe a little harder question. What do you got? I see 3.
3 letters. 3 letters.
5?
1 gospel and a revelation.
5 has it.
Oh.
Okay, we'll go through them. The Gospel of John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and the book of Revelation. Now it's interesting here. We mentioned Paul as the great theologian. In 1st and 2nd Peter, Peter is a little bit of a theologian. He develops the doctrine of suffering for righteousness. That's what both books are about. He's a bit of a theologian in there. And, John speaks about the necessity in his letters, particularly about loving one another. But they're short. And of course, Revelation is just, he's writing down a vision that Jesus gives to him. The one who really writes theology is Paul when he gets into Romans and 1st and 2nd Corinthians and all his different letters. He's the theologian of the New Testament, dominant theologian. And I don't know if I mentioned the other writers in the New Testament. You have James, who they believe was Jesus' younger brother, who wrote the book of James. Jude, who was again one of his brothers. And let's see, we've got Luke wrote Acts and the Gospel of Luke. Mark wrote the Gospel of Mark. Matthew wrote one book, he wrote Matthew. So that's it. And we have a small group of men who wrote those. And, so the next best, John writes 5, and 3 of them are extremely short. This Paul, that's why I say he's the theologian of the New Testament. Writing half the books, half the gospel, half the book of Acts is about him. So, and the other thing Paul does in a way that no one else does in the New Testament, he bears his soul and he bears his heart in his letters. So we not only know what he wrote and what he did, we know how he felt and how he thought. So we see a man of God on the inside in Paul. The comparison, I left it there, is with David. David in the Old Testament and the psalmists will bear their hearts and their feelings. So there's no Psalms in the New Testament, but there's Paul talking about what he's thinking and feeling. And so we get an inside look at an apostle from Paul. 2 Corinthians 6:11, O ye Corinthians, our mouth is open unto you, our heart is enlarged. And when Paul would preach and win people, he would befriend them. And they became really his family. They were bosom, they were family. So we see a man who's a great theologian, a great evangelist, a great missionary, but he's a wonderful dear friend to the people that he ministers to. So he has that personal touch too. He's doing, the whole thing. And not everybody does all those things that well. I remember when I was pastoring a church, and I would say, if I ever decided to sit down for a meal, the phone would ring. Or if I ever decided to try to make it to the bathroom, the phone would ring. This was before cell phones. This is really getting annoying. We could count. Okay, it's time to eat. We're waiting for the ring. And then my hearing went. And people, I started handing the phone to my wife all the time, and all the phone calls stopped. It was not the worst thing on the planet.
There's a reason.
And a pastor with a cell phone today, it's wonderful that you can access your pastor that way. But who else can you get free and godly counsel from 24/7 and feel free to do it? He's the man. So it's an interesting thing. A pastor becomes more accessible to his congregation than ever before. That has its pros and cons. How do you separate your personal life from your public ministry? I don't know. It's getting very interesting. Think about that sometimes. All right. So you look at the Psalms. The troubles of my heart are enlarged. Oh, bring me out of my distresses. Paul talks about some of those personal distresses. So what the kind of heart-bearing we see in the Psalms, the New Testament comes from the Apostle Paul. So this is Christianity from the inside, how it felt, how he thought, struggles he went through. Remember he says in Romans, oh wretched man that I am. The what? The greatest of the great apostles says, oh wretched man that I am. Who shall deliver me? Deliver me from this body of sin? Or is it called body of death? I think body of death he calls it.
Romans.
Whoa! From our great apostle Paul. This is very interesting. We see things like this in Psalms, and we see it in Paul's writings. Now, I'm at least 8 places in Acts we hear of Paul performing public miracles. And that's the most of any of the apostles. And we'll look at that. I will mention a couple of them here. This is perhaps the one that's the most ironic. He's passing through Iconium, and he gets the synagogue of the Jews. Let's see. The Jews stir up the Gentiles against him. And I'm going to go on here. And the city is divided. So, but look at this thing next here. In 6, he has to flee, and he goes to Lystra and Derbe, and the region of Lycaonia. While he's there, he is preaching the gospel, and he sees a lame man in verse 7. And he's crippled from his mother's womb, and Paul looks at him and senses this man has faith to be healed. And he says with a loud voice, stand upright on your feet. And the man leaps up and walks. Now Paul performs this miracle. We did a miracle almost identical. Who, folks, in the book of Acts? You read it. You did your homework last week. Peter, the lame man at the beautiful gate. So it's almost the same kind of scene. But he is in a Gentile city, and instead of listening to him preach, they want to worship him as a god.
Right.
This is the difference. So they actually do this. The gods have come down to us in the likeness of men. And they call Barnabas Jupiter, and Paul Mercurius, because he was the chief speaker. Then the priest of Jupiter, which was before the city, brought ox and garland unto the gates, and would have done sacrifice with the people. And Paul and Barnabas scream and yell, no. So he's same kind of miracles, Peter, but now he's in a Gentile environment. And because of the cultural difference, they want to worship him as gods. Well, they do stop the people from worshiping. But here's the ironic part. This is crazy thing with Paul's ministry, it happened so many times, people who would see his miracles would then turn against him. It says, and he talks to them about not worshiping idols. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but in verse 18, and with these sayings scarce restrained thee the people, that they had not done sacrifice unto them. And Luke is writing this to say, they, barely were able to keep these people from sacrificing to them and worshiping them as gods. And then the shocker, verse 19 in one verse. And there came thither certain Jews from Antioch and Iconium. That's not the Antioch where Paul started from. It's an Antioch. We talked about the two Antiochs in ancient history. But this is a Gentile city. They come, they persuaded the people, and having stoned Paul. They're going to worship him, and then they're going to do what? They're going to stone him. One of the things you will notice when you pastor churches over years, you will find people over a period of time who are your most zealous supporters. And some of them will turn on you and attack you and try to destroy you. The people who almost what? Worshipped you, turn and attack you. Does this always happen? No, but it happens. And maybe it's better when sometimes people don't think you're all wonderful. And they don't put you on a pedestal. Then they don't attack you when you act like a human being on occasion. There's something to it. There's something to it. But really, there are two. Now Paul is raised from the dead. The believers gather. I'm not going to read the whole thing. The believers gather around him, and he gets back up and walks back into the city. So in that city, he has healed a lame man who's been lame since an infant, since birth. And he's raised from the dead. And we believe when Paul talks about that, he knows a man 13 years ago who he doesn't know in the body or out of the body, but was taken up into the third heaven. That this is when it happened, while he was physically dead. So this is an incredible thing going on here. The Apostle Paul is raised from the dead. Not just spared from death, but raised. He's stoned. Some of the others that's going on here, I mentioned him. In Acts 16, he casts a demon out of a girl who's a soothsayer and starts a riot. And she comes. In Acts 19, this is it. And this is, Acts 19 is Paul in his, how do I say it? His best years. Let's put it that way. He spent 3 years in Ephesus, and God gave him the ability to perform extraordinary miracles. So, God was performing extraordinary miracles by the hand of Paul, so that handkerchiefs or aprons were even carried from his body to the sick, and the diseases left them, and the evil spirits went out of them. You come to Ephesus in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, and you say, I have someone back home who's sick. And Paul prays over a napkin or a handkerchief. You bring it back home, lay it on the person, they were healed. The result was, if you read Acts 19, is all of Asia heard the gospel from Paul. Meaning when people heard about this, they came to Ephesus to hear this man from all over Turkey. And this is Paul is regularly, we don't know how many, but he's regularly performing public miracles. And it's creating a tremendous stir, and he spends 3 years in the city. Acts 20, probably his most famous miracle. We could have this at Bible college. Some of you sat on the windowsill. What happens, folks?
Kid
He
falls out.
preaches long. Oh, we know this story. And people do what? The young man falls asleep on the windowsill. Crash, he goes, dead on arrival at the ground. And Paul says, no, he's not dead. His life is in him. And the man is healed. This is Paul. So, we have at least 8 major public miracles recorded in the book of Acts from Paul. I don't know, I'll mention a few other. Oh, here we are. When they are shipwrecked and end up, they find out they're on the island of Malta. Now we're close to home, folks. We're in where? Malta. And after being shipwrecked, they start a fire to dry everybody out. A viper, how to say, fastens to his hand. He has to shake him into the fire. And they said, oh, the gods. He was a criminal. He was brought here for justice. The gods caught up with him, and Paul was not hurt. So he is miraculously spared. Then he prays for the father of Publius, who is a leader in the island, and he heals the man. And he has a Malta revival. He has a Malta up. Revival. Yes. Anyway, it's an incredible story. And it's recorded there. So, sum up here. Saved at age 32. At AD 32, not age 32. AD 32 at about age 27. That's how historians figure, about around there. He ministers for 30 years, about 30 years. Dies, some say at age 62, he's around that. So, we have a little more than 30 years of ministry, depending how the dates different historians give you. He writes how many books in the Bible in those 30 years? 13 or 14 books. He's short and sweet. He takes the gospel. He mentions about wishing to go to Spain. We actually have some reason to believe he actually did make it to Spain after he was released in his first imprisonment. He takes the gospel from Jerusalem to Spain. 4 missionary trips. 13 or 14 books of the New Testament in just 30 years. This is a remarkable life. And the only record we have of his death is Ignatius of Antioch stated in a writing, we have record of this, that Paul was martyred. No word on exactly how. And the rest is speculation. We know more about his life than anyone else in the New Testament except Jesus. But we know very little about his death. Now, comparison, Peter here. I mentioned this. Acts 3, heals the lame man at the gate. Peter prophesies a miracle here, kind of a negative one. He says Ananias and Sapphira, he knows they're lying to the Holy Spirit, saying they had sold land and gave the full price to the apostles, and only gave a part to the apostles. He calls them on it, and Ananias drops dead. Calls Sapphira, your husband, he lied to me too, and he dropped dead, and they're going to carry you out with him, and she goes, ugh, and she goes over. We'll call that a miracle. Okay? Peter raises Lydia or Dorcas from the dead in Acts chapter 9. Now you could remember in the Gospels, Peter did walk on what? Water for a few steps. He got a little bit. And Peter did pull a gold coin out of a fish, and really, Jesus said, you do it, he did it, so maybe we could say he took part. And one other thing here that is mentioned, I didn't know if I have it in my notes. Jesus did send out the 12, and they all did perform miracles. But we have a record of Peter at most performing 5 miracles. Paul at least 8, and when we say 8, we know he was in Ephesus performing miracles regularly over a 3-year period of time. So it's incredible. So he excels in miracles, excels in theology, excels in church building, excels in evangelism, and then the last thing I want to talk about is he excelled in suffering. If you look at this, he's in 1 Corinthians 15:10, he says of himself, but by the grace of God I am what I am. And his grace which was bestowed upon me was not in vain, but I labored more abundantly than they all. Yet not I, but the grace of God which was with me. Did Paul just say he was the greatest of the apostles? How did he get away with such a statement? Not I, but what?
God.
The grace of God was with me. When we look at his sufferings, we're going to see that there's a very true statement. Paul had all the reasons to quit and give up and not go. We're going to see what he endured, that actually for him to get out of bed and move in the morning took grace. He was in that bad a physical condition. All right, so we're going to look at the case for that. So, how about the agony? I don't know who first said it, but I heard it many times, the saying, he cannot greatly use him whom he has not what? Greatly bruised. And Paul was tremendously bruised. Now you're seeing a scourge. That's a scourging instrument. When I've seen pictures of ancient scourging instruments, some of them have leather thongs with things tied at the end, usually rocks, glass, stone, or lead. pieces. So they cut and they bruise. But if you receive 39 lashes with one of those, you don't have 39 stripes on your back. You have 39 times 3 stripes on your back, along with bruises. So you can imagine this. Now, here's our question here. How many times did Paul say he was scourged by the Jews? Give me your fingers there, folks.
1-7.
How many times was he scourged by the Jews? He records it in the scriptures.
Oh,
3?
3 times.
3 times.
3? Anybody else?
9.
I want to show you the scriptures here. 2 Corinthians 11:24, of the Jews 5 times received I 40 stripes save one. In case you're not, the Jews, as a punishment, to give 40 stripes, but never to go beyond the word of God, they would stop at 39. But a scourging tool always had more than one throw. So if he is scourged with a like that, take 39 times 3, 27, that's one scourging. Now multiply times 5.
585.
Does that mean his back was opened up 600 times? Now this is why Paul can say, I am what I am by the grace of God. No human could do that and continue to minister. How much pain did he live with? I can only imagine. You know, some of you have had a terrible migraine and your back go out and you're just, or recovering from surgery and you just, that he was able to do what he did after that. So, it is, you know, it's upsetting to think of a man in dealing with that kind of pain and yet to be so effective and so fervent and labor so diligently. In good health, what he did would be hard, but he did not have that luxury. It gets worse. How many times was he beaten with rods?
Say that again?
3. Yes, he was. Now, the beating, as I understand this historically, is they would, you know, strap you down and beat the bottoms of your feet. We do not know how many times the rods hit his feet, but I can only imagine after being beaten 3 times with rods, each one several times hit with rods, that for Paul to take a step was incredibly painful. It had to be. So he's traveling on, you know, he's standing and preaching and his feet are killing him. This is what you have to imagine, and somehow God gave him grace to do this. Your back ripped apart, your feet destroyed, and you're going to do what? Go on a what? A missionary trip. Oh. I think sometimes God had him arrested and put in prison because it was safer there. Paul, we don't want you to get beaten up anymore. In a nice safe place for you. So one place they didn't beat him usually. Oh, so this is why he says, I am what I am by the what? By the grace of God. Paul did not have enough guts or strength to do this. He had to be supernaturally, he had to experience grace in an amazing way just to get up in the morning and function and do anything. So, thrice I was beaten with rods, once was I stoned, we read about that, 3 times shipwrecked, a night and a day in the deep, float in the ocean on some driftwood, journeys often, in that kind of physical shape, in perils of water, perils of robber, perils by my own countrymen, perils of the heathen, perils in the city, perils in the wilderness, perils in the sea, perils among false brethren. So not only should it be a physical wreck, it should be a mental wreck. Okay, I mean, this is stress. Stress affects you. He's, you know, getting it to the nth degree. In weariness, and what? What's he saying? Painfulness. It's not, this is his life. In watchings often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness. And then he, on the inside, besides those things that are without, that which comes upon me daily, the care of the churches. And he worried and was concerned about others. And the rest of them would say, get me to the doctor, and I want the strongest painkiller I can have, please. And Paul's out preaching. So we see it, you know, a courageous man, but he was. I think it's Charles Swindoll has written about Paul, and he calls him the man of grace and grit. He needed all kinds of grace, but he also needed all kinds of what?
Correct.
Grit, yeah. Because it isn't like, oh, I had grace and didn't feel any pain. He's not saying this. In what? Painfulness. So he had grace, but he still had, you know, what do we call it? Incredible suffering the man went through. So, in Galatians, he says, from henceforth let no man trouble me. I bear in my body the marks of the Lord Jesus. Wouldn't it be fun to be the Apostle Paul? No! It was an agonizing, wonderful life. These are contradictions, but they're there. This is the man. This is why we see, you know, he's on display in the New Testament in such a way. Now, his health, what he went through, it did affect him. And Philemon in 1:9, he said he calls himself Paul the Aged. He's in prison. He's not yet executed. His first imprisonment is in Rome. And he writes, maybe 64, around 64 AD, a little before that perhaps. But he calls himself Paul the Aged. He's barely 60 years old, but his body is shot. I'm Paul the what? The Aged. This affects him. So, and then his attitude. Here we have it. 2 Corinthians 12:7. Not many people could say, oh yes, I do this. This is how I live. Because this gets interesting. You say, does the man have enough trouble? Does he need any more? No, but he gets it. And it comes from God. Whoa. 2 Corinthians 12:7. Unless I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of the revelations. I was reading this and saying, wait a minute. Weren't the 39 lashes 5 times enough to keep you humbled? You don't need any more pain, Paul. The 3 beatings, don't they count? You really needed something else here? The Lord thought so. Lest I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of revelation, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. After all that. For this thing I besought the Lord thrice, that it might depart from me. It seems to be a physical disease, but a demon is inflicting it upon me. And he said unto me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, look at his attitude, therefore I would rather glory in my infirmities. He did not say infirmity. I have to imagine after the beatings and the stripes and the physical illness that he had some other physical problems he was dealing with too. Some of you know what that's about. You have one physical problem and then you get, you know, another. And you know, and 6 different doctors giving you 20 different pills. You know, some of you understand this thing. I mean, infirmities, that's what he said. So he does what? Most gladly, you're kidding me, Paul. Therefore will I rather glory in my infirmities. Oh, you gotta be kidding. But the power of Christ may rest upon me. So what did he experience? Incredible pain. And what at the same moment? The power of Christ. It's quite a paradox. That's what he says. Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions, in distresses for Christ's sake. Count here. He takes pleasure in what? Infirmities, reproaches, necessities, persecutions, distresses. What's our number? How many? 5. What's 5 represent? Grace. What's he telling us? I get grace for all 5. But I experience all 5. Yeah, it's horrifying. In distresses for Christ's sake, for when I am weak, then am I strong. Oh, quite a life. Now, Mark shared me a note explaining his illness. We'll talk just a minute about it, what this infirmity he had. He was reading a comment from a commentator in his own Bible, and it said this: the apostle was, it appears from my considerations, afflicted with chronic ophthalmia, a common disease in the East, to the point of total blindness. meaning the disease was affecting him, and one of the symptoms was that you lose your sight.